We are counting down 15 days to the June 3rd snap election, and presidential hopefuls faced off in their first TV debate regarding the economy this past Sunday. With more on Press Perspective today. Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Press Perspective for this Monday, May 19th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we touch upon the first TV debate among Korea's presidential candidates regarding the economy that was aired live Sunday evening. For more on this, I have freelance journalist Yang Chien-Hao from Taiwan here in the studio. Chien-Hao, as always, welcome back.
Hello, good to be here today.
I also have Fabian Kretschmer, a correspondent for German news agency DPA, here in the studio as well. Fabian, it's good to have you here.
Thanks, good to be here.
Right, Chien-Hao, we'll start with you. Let's begin with the remarks shared by the Liberal Party contender Lee Jae-myung last night during the TV debate.
So I would say Lee Jae-myung is very different from the conservatives because as like Kim Moon-soo and Lee Joon-seok are insisting that the new government needs to further expand its deregulation, mainly focusing on improving the role that the market itself should be. But Lee Jae-myung himself is emphasizing more on the role which the government should play or even directly get involved in. So last night he had mentioned that growth is definitely necessary, but for distribution, there will be no growth without good distribution. And he said that since the economic situation for ordinary people in South Korea is very difficult, that the government needs to take part in adjusting it. It will be important to quickly pass a supplementary budget. In Korean, we call chugyong, right? The supplementary budget in order to boost the economy. And he didn't mention the detail about how to boost the economy by the passing the supplementary budget, but he seems to indicate that the government will expand the expenditures to improve the economy. And I think this reflects somehow the very strong leftist, left-wing mindset. And during his term as mayor of Seongnam City and then the governor of Gyeonggi Province, he became known for distributing subsidies to people. So that's what we can see through his past experiences.
Right. This being said then, Fabian, what can you tell us about the thoughts shared by Conservative Party candidate Kim Moon-soo last night?
Yeah, I think the key message that Kim Moon-soo was propagating was deregulation, and he emphasized that quite a bit, namely deregulation for the business. I mean, basically let the business have a free environment in order to create jobs. I think that's his strategy. He thinks that business are the engines of growth for an economy, and they should be basically left alone. The state should give them freedom. However, he still wants the state to play a role. He says that the state should give out loans and basically support indirectly, but mostly he shares liberal ideas. Also, he wants to ease the 52-week regulation, mainly for high-income workers. So, for example, in the semiconductor sector, that maybe they could be allowed to work longer to be more competitive. Also, he wants the wage system to be more performance-based. So basically that, what you earn is basically how much you perform. And I think those are really classical liberal ideas.
Right. Now, Chien-Hao, Reform Party presidential hopeful Lee Joon-seok also shared his thoughts regarding the economy. What was the gist of his economic blueprint?
So Lee Joon-seok is claiming that the essence of economic growth is the improvement of productivity. He's always like emphasizing productivity. South Korea, as a country relying on exports, need to survive the global competition first. So the whole country will be able to provide competitive products in order to make more money. And Lee emphasized that the government needs to develop human capabilities. So a human will not be replaced by AI or by robots eventually. But meanwhile, before the TV debate, he had already mentioned many times that South Korea should foster foster more skilled professionals and increase the investment and budget in AI technology. And also, when talking about the diplomatic relations and economic cooperations, Lee Joon-seok has mentioned that the United States is not only the trading partner, but also a country sharing common national security and strategy with South Korea together. And to strengthen the alliance with the United States, it is also necessary for South Korea itself to manage the relationship with Japan in a very pragmatic way. And during the debate, we can also see that Lee Joon-seok had attacked Lee Jae-myung several times, criticizing on his policy of boosting economic development through increased government spending or subsidies.
Right, and before we delve further into that, for the sake of our foreign viewers, Chien-Hao, who may not be familiar with Lee Joon-seok, because we've covered Lee Jae-myung and Kim Moon-soo quite a bit, could you tell us a bit about Lee Joon-seok and his political activities?
Yeah, so Lee is being regarded as a young star politician in South Korea in the conservative part, and he majored in computer science and economics in Harvard University, and then entered into the politics by the invitation of President Park Geun-hye and joined the ruling party in 2011. And however, he strongly criticized President Park Geun-hye due to her corruption scandal involving with Choi Soon-sil in 2016. And in 2021, Lee Joon-seok has become the leader of People Power Party and helped Yoon Suk-yeol with his presidential campaign. And after President Yoon took office in 2022, we can see that Lee Joon-seok began to have conflicts with the president himself and many of the party members inside the ruling party. And then he was being stripped off of his party membership for 1 year due to the allegations of being involved in sex for favor scandal. But later, the case was closed due to the expiration of the statute of limitations and concluded with no charges filed. I think for Lee Joon-seok himself, he will strongly see that this is like a revenge or retaliation by the ruling party. And last year, he formed the Reform Party and running for the general election. Indeed, he had run for general election for 3 times already, but all failed, including one time with An Chol-soo. But last year, he defeated his rival from the Democratic Party and finally become the member of National Assembly. Along with him, the Reform Party has gained 3 seats in the National Assembly. And as a conservative politician, Lee is indeed more media friendlier than other people. Even liberal media, progressive media, newspapers and television channels like to invite him, but Lee is one of the politicians criticizing also on feminism and claiming that the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family should be abolished, which earned him strong support from many young men in South Korea, but also meanwhile provoked backlash from many women.
Right, he's also the youngest presidential candidate for this particular election. Fabian, Democratic Labour Party presidential candidate Kwon Young-guk was also present for Sunday's televised debate. What was his economic message?
Yeah, he comes from a leftist perspective. He's also quite progressive. Actually, he talked a lot about topics that were indirectly also economic, but also societal issues. He said he's against discrimination of minorities, and he included also migrant worker communities and also sexual minorities. And that is something quite daring to say in Korea, which is still quite conservative. And so he basically emphasize that he's the voice of the people who usually don't have a strong voice or strong platform. And what he said is that South Korea has been getting wealthy, but actually not everyone benefited equal. So that you have a rich people, but actually the normal worker may be still suffering, maybe still having a hard time. And he's not for pushing growth per se, but he wants to have fair growth, and he's more about the redistribution of the wealth, so it becomes more fairly shared, basically.
And what more can you tell us about him, Kwon Young-guk? I mean, about his political history.
Yeah, actually, his positions become clear if you look at his biography. He was born in 1963, actually in the eastern part of South Korea, near the Taebaek Mountains, really a mountainous region, and he was growing up in very poor circumstances. His family was not well off, but he was a bright student, and he actually ended up studying at Seoul, at Seoul National University, the leading university of Korea. He studied engineering, but then switched to becoming a human rights lawyer, and he focused very strongly on workers' rights, labor rights. And his nickname was basically he's a street lawyer. And why? Because he didn't spend so much time in the courtroom, but was more seen whenever there was a demonstration, a hunger strike. I mean, he was out in the field, out in the street, because he basically is an activist. And whenever there was like an industrial accident or some other tragedy within the what the civil society was dealing about, he was always there on site and basically supporting the weak people or the simple workers, and supported them.
Right. Chien-Hao, moving into a bit of detail with regard to yesterday's debate now, based on what was shared, what do you expect with regard to tariff talks between Seoul and Washington if Liberal Party candidate Lee Jae-myung wins the presidential election?
If you watched the debate last night, you can indeed see that while Kim Moon-soo and Lee Joon-seok are emphasizing the strengthening alliances partnership with the United States, Lee Jae-myung himself had mentioned more on the situation of the world economic being shaken by President Trump taking office either in 2017 or this year. And he even mentioned that President Trump is getting radical and more extreme, and his policies on tariff is making many of its allies feeling threatened in some extent, also making Korean enterprises, making Korean companies become more difficult. So South Korea should negotiate with the United States, but it doesn't mean that South Korea should completely accept what the United States has requested. So according to his words, he places greater emphasis on South Korea's autonomy and principles, and comparing to Kim Moon-soo and Lee Joon-seok, his stance toward the United States is way much tougher, and maybe he want to grab the chance, showing voters that he is very focusing on balancing South Korea's position instead of making Korea become more risky when dealing with Trump administration. And since Lee Jae-myung now, he is still the candidate. If he's been elected, I bet he won't speak like that last night anymore. And many people are indeed forecasting that if it's Lee Jae-myung being elected, South Korea will shift away from the United States and toward China. That's what we have also discussed several times on the program. And I think based on his public speeches, his words, it might be understandable. It might happen in the future. But recently, there are also rumors that in order to maximize the support and maintaining the situation become stable, Lee Jae-myung will indeed choose a stance, making South Korea keeping itself as like close alliance relationship with the United States and Japan, at least on his like first or second year in office. And as we can see that last night's debate, when Lee Joon-seok blaming Lee Jae-myung too pro-China and even asked his position if Taiwan is being invaded by China, Lee Jae-myung has replied that there's no need for Korea to get involved in it, and South Korea will try to maintain good relations with Taiwan and China, then South Korea can act in a more flexible way. It is not appropriate for people to call him as a pro-Chinese guy. That's what he said in the debate last night.
Right. Fabian, I'd like to extend the same question to you. Based on what you have been hearing on the ground, what do you suppose would be the direction, that is, of tariff talks between Seoul and Washington if the conservative presidential candidate Kim Moon-soo were to win the presidential election?
Yeah, so he has a less confrontational approach. I mean, he wants to get rid of the tariffs, of course, but he is more accommodating to the US. And I think one really key difference is that he wants to get a deal done with the US before the deadline set by US President Donald Trump expires in July. And that is different, quite a different stance than, for example, Lee Jae-myung. He said we should have strategic patience, we should not rush things and make it thoroughly. And he said it's unlikely that there will be a deal very soon, and I think it could take longer. While actually Kim Moon-soo sees, or he also emphasizes that he has a personal rapport with Trump, that he presumably will get along with him well. We'll see if that really is the case. But yeah, I think he basically emphasizes South Korea and the US, we share the same values, freedom, democracy, and we need each other. I mean, especially South Korea needs the US for security. And I expect that it will be more harmonious when he's in power.
Right. And staying with the economy, Chien-Hao, what is actually the current state of the Korean economy?
I had mentioned last week that South Korea is indeed experiencing one of the most severe inflation indeed from the end of pandemic. And also, if you take a look at the on the street in Seoul, you will be able to see that many spaces are indeed become empty and waiting to be rented out. That means that so many stores are bankrupt or are closed down. According to the statistics from the National Tax Service, the annual number of the stores closing down were around 870,000 to 920,000, but the latest number has been risen to 980,000, very close to 1 million. And that is why many people in South Korea, many voters, are complaining that because you can see that President Yoon, when running for the election in 2021 and 2022, he directly criticized and blamed that President Moon Jae-in for unable to handle the economic very well, and it is triggering to big crisis, and that the situation is getting even worse in Yoon Suk-yeol's short 2.5 term, and then the upcoming forecast is not optimistic either. As KDI, the Korean Development Institute, has revised that South Korea's GDP growth from the original 1.6% to 0.8%, which is split completely in half. These are related to, of course, the United States increasing tariffs. Also, South Korea's domestic consumption, shopping, continue to underperform, with the recovery progressing slower than expected. And now more and more people are worrying that South Korea is heading toward a very long-term recession.
Right, those are the concerns at present. Another concern, Fabian, is also the reality that youth unemployment remains quite a problem here in the country. What more can you add?
Yeah, I don't want to overly dramatize it, because it always depends with which country you compare the situation. And I mean, there are far more severe countries with youth unemployment. But in South Korea, I would say it is a tough problem. The unemployment rate overall is not so much concerning, but the youth unemployment rate is always a little bit higher. And actually, it's over 7%. In last month, it reached almost 7.5%. And what I find quite alarming is that on the one hand, the qualification of young South Koreans is extremely high. The rate of university degrees is extremely high, and there are not enough appropriate jobs for young people. So many end up then more in the informal sector or having precarious work contracts. That is a problem. And if you also look at the number of young people who are actually not employed, but also not in training, and also not looking for a job. I mean, basically, young people who gave up on the job market, that is also increasing. And basically, those young people, they might be living off the wealth of their parents, or maybe live very minimalist lifestyles. But I think it's concerning, because those are the future of South Korea, and many of them actually right now see only very tough perspectives on their life.
Right. And Chien-Hao, based on your interviews with voters here in the country as we look ahead to the June 3rd snap election, are you expecting a large voter turnout during this particular election, or have the dramatic political events over the past few weeks, have they alienated the public, do you suppose, or have they served to perhaps boost a greater sense of civic engagement?
I think it is still very hard to predict, because as I interview with many voters, like both the conservatives and progressive, many people are saying that they are definitely gonna vote. And according to the polls, you can see that these 2 and 3 weeks, around like 82 to 84% of the people, they are also replying that they are definitely gonna vote on June 3rd. But as I interview with many political experts, political experts and like professors, they are saying that since Lee Jae-myung is almost being confirmed to be elected as the president, the turnout might be like lower than expected. Yeah, then it might be like around like 75 to 80%, probably a bit similar to last time, or even lower. But but when I go to the rally or when I go to like the streets, when meeting people outside, many of them, like the conservatives, they are saying that in order to show that we are not, in order to show that we still have power. We will definitely gonna come and vote. And also on the other hand, the progressive, they're saying that we need to show that President Yoon's declaration of martial law and all of the things that the ruling party do is just a mess. It's causing trouble and it needs to be punished. So we are also gonna come out and vote, trying to make the gap between Lee Jae-myung and other rivals like become bigger. As we can see that in the like former elections, like except for 2017, most of the election, the gap is not that harsh, right? Except for 2007 and 2017. Other elections, like for example, Kim Dae-jung and Lee Hoi-chang, and Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyung, and last time Lee Jae-myung and President Yoon Suk-yeol, the gap is among like 0.7% to 3%. So this is very, very short, very little. So this time we can see if Lee Jae-myung, yeah, probably he's gonna win. But what is the gap between Lee Jae-myung and his rival? Is it gonna be more than 20%, or if it's like if people like trying to vote for Lee Joon-seok as a substitute plan, then will Lee Jae-myung's the gap between him and other rivals become more smaller? That's what we need to see.
Right, but all this is purely speculation for now,
right?
Though, right? And very quickly, Fabian, what have you been hearing on the ground from voters here? We have like about 30 seconds left.
Yeah, I think many people are a little bit disillusioned, and especially within the last months, what happened, the endless fighting between the political parties, also the lack of respect towards democratic institutions, that is a breeding ground for basically political fatigue. And right now, I don't see the broader public being eagerly passionate about either of those candidates. The turnout might be high, but I think in general we have a debate right now how democracy can serve the people better, and I think in the future there is hope for improvement.
Fingers crossed for that then. All right, Fabian, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. Chien-Hao, thank you very much for your insights. Right, presidential hopefuls have 2 more debates lined up, with the second one slated for Friday on social matters. Thank you for watching. Press Perspective returns same time tomorrow.